This is Cyprus, the third largest and third most populated island in the Mediterranean. Cyprus is often geographically considered a part of West Asia, while historically and culturally it more closely aligns with Europe. In fact, the Republic of Cyprus became a member of the European Union back in 2004. However, despite this, it only controls about 59% of the island, with 36% being occupied by the self-declared Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Akrotiri and Dhekelia, a British overseas territory and a demilitarized buffer zone patrolled by a United Nations peacekeeping force, account for the remaining 5% of the island's area. And while this is the situation today, it isn't exactly unique. Indeed, for centuries, if not longer, Cyprus has been the center of a sort of tug-of-war between East and West. A pretty good example of this being the Fourth Ottoman Venetian War, which began in June 1570 and concluded in March 1573. Cyprus, then an overseas possession of the Republic of Venice, was ultimately conquered by an Ottoman force of well over 100,000 men following the Siege of Famagusta. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. How exactly did Cyprus come under Venetian control in the first place, and just why did the Ottomans want to conquer the island so badly? Well, the answer to both of these questions, sort of, is religion. More specifically, the clash between Christianity and Islam. Okay, so during the Third Crusade, the island of Cyprus was ruled over by this guy, Isaac Doukas Komnenos of the Byzantine Empire. Isaac was not a very nice guy though, with a contemporary Byzantine historian describing him as a violent man boiling with anger like a kettle on fire. And so, perhaps it's not surprising the so-called Emperor of Cyprus, upon learning in 1191 that 3 English ships had sunk near the port city of Limassol, captured and imprisoned the shipwrecked survivors. Shortly after this, another ship arrived on scene carrying King Richard I of England's sister, Joan, and his wife-to-be, Berengaria of Navarre. They requested to disembark in order to gather fresh water and other supplies, which Isaac flatly refused. Then, King Richard himself showed up, his fleet having been scattered due to a storm while en route to Acre, and upon learning of the situation, decided to simply conquer the island. The English quickly bested their Cypriot opponents, and Isaac was later taken captive while attempting to flee to the mainland. Although Cyprus offered a strategic location for the Crusaders to launch other campaigns into the Near East, King Richard, after having to put down a rebellion by one of Isaac's relatives, quickly realized it would be a difficult territory to manage, and so, instead, sold the island to the Knights Templar, a Catholic military order. The severity of Templar rule on Cyprus, however, incurred the hatred of the largely Orthodox population. And on Easter Day, 1192, the island's new rulers found themselves under siege at their stronghold in Nicosia. Having little other choice as those gathered outside refused to negotiate, the Templars decided to sally forth at dawn and actually managed to take the Cypriots by surprise. A massacre then followed, and while this bloodletting restored the order's rule on Cyprus, the Templars were not exactly keen to stay and begged the English to take the island back. King Richard obliged, and upon learning that a vassal of his, Guy of Lusignan, had somewhat recently lost his claim to Jerusalem's throne, the monarch looked to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. By offering Guy the island of Cyprus, King Richard allowed him to save face and maintain some vestige of power in the Near East, while more importantly, ridding himself of a troublesome holding. This effectively marked the establishment of the Kingdom of Cyprus. However, no sooner had Guy taken the throne, he died in 1194 without any heir. And so his brother, Amalric, became King of Cyprus. A small Catholic elite, which likely never exceeded 25% of the island's population, based itself in the capital, Nicosia, and coastal settlements like Famagusta, while the Greek Orthodox majority lived mostly in more rural areas. The island kingdom benefited considerably from the fall of Acre in 1291, becoming the center for European trade in the eastern Mediterranean. This in turn led to a greater demand for goods like cotton, sugar, wine, carob, olive oil, and wheat, transforming the island's traditionally agrarian economy into a more export-driven one. This newfound prosperity fueled the development of settlements like Limassol, Paphos, and Kyrenia, while also encouraging immigration from Italian merchant republics such as Genoa and Venice. Nonetheless, the Kingdom of Cyprus would itself become a tributary state of the Mamluks in 1426. Though still nominally independent, this changed following the marriage by proxy of James II of Cyprus to Catherine Cornaro in July 1468. Coming from a well-connected Venetian family, Catherine's marriage greatly benefited the Republic, which gained commercial rights and other privileges on Cyprus. And shortly after their wedding, James II died in July 1473, leaving Catherine as regent of their newborn child, James III. Just a few months after his first birthday, James III died of an illness, although some sources claim he was poisoned. Now, as Queen of Cyprus, Catherine ruled over the island from August 1474 to February 1489. Real power, however, was vested in the Venetian merchant community. Rumors soon began to spread, though, that Alfonso II of Naples planned to marry Catherine, and if that wasn't bad enough, the Ottoman Empire seemed to be preparing for a future invasion of the island. And so, Catherine was recalled to Venice, where after some back and forth, the Doge persuaded her to abdicate. Cyprus then became an overseas possession, or Stato da Mar, literally State of the Sea, of the Republic of Venice, a rather ignominious end for the last of the Crusader States. Although Venice opted to maintain a policy of annual tribute following the conquest of Mamluk Egypt, Cyprus's position between Anatolia and newly acquired territories in the Levant and North Africa made it a tempting target for Ottoman expansion. Constantinople, moreover, bristled at protection by local Venetian authorities of corsairs who harassed Ottoman vessels, including those with pilgrims on their way to Mecca. And so, following conclusion of a prolonged war in Hungary, Selim II, also known as Selim the Blonde or Selim the Drunk, turned his attention to Cyprus. FYI, it's rumored that his favorite drink was Cypriot wine. He wasn't alone in focusing on Cyprus, not the wine thing. Joseph Nasi, a Portuguese Sephardi Jew and close personal advisor to the Sultan, also had his eye on Cyprus. Nasi, who upon Selim's ascension had been named Duke of Naxos, harbored a deep resentment for Venice. What's more, he seems to have believed the Sultan would nominate him as King of Cyprus after its conquest, having reportedly ordered a crown and royal banner made in anticipation of this. There was just one problem. The Ottomans had, in 1567, renewed their peace treaty with Venice, and to breach this would undoubtedly tarnish the port's reputation. This argument was championed by Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, who opposed a war with Venice. But following a favorable opinion by the Shah al-Islam, who justified invasion as Cyprus had previously been a part of the Rashidun Caliphate and therefore a former land of Islam that could be reconquered, the Ottoman Empire began to mobilize. For their part, the Venetians were not unaware of Ottoman intentions here. Ottoman raids were a regular event on Cyprus, and in 1564-1565, a war scare occurred when a sizable Ottoman fleet suddenly appeared just off the island's coast. While it eventually departed for Malta, another smaller fleet with Nasi showed up in September 1568 as part of a thinly veiled attempt to spy on the island's defenses. In response, the Venetians undertook a series of projects to defend their overseas possessions, most notably Cyprus. Nicosia's old Frankish-era walls were demolished and work begun on new fortifications better designed to meet the threat posed by gunpowder. The island's garrison likewise was increased, and efforts were made to make Cyprus more self-sufficient through construction of local foundries, gunpowder mills, cisterns, and storehouses. However, it was recognized that Cyprus, exposed and isolated from Venice, likely could not hold out for long unaided. As a contemporary historian noted, the island was already in the wolf's mouth. In late June 1570, some 350 to 400 Ottoman ships carrying 60,000 men set sail for Cyprus. Raiding parties struck first near Lara and Limassol, before the bulk of the Ottoman force under the command of Lala Kara Mustafa Pasha, an ethnic Bosniak and former tutor of Sultan Selim II, landed unopposed on the island's southern shore. The Venetians had debated opposing the Ottoman landing, but believed defeat here would mean a collapse of the island's overall defenses, opting to withdraw and hold out until reinforcements from Europe arrived. As more Ottoman raiders made their way to Lefkara, Mustafa marched his force northward to Nicosia. With its walls still unfinished, the city fell on September 9th, after which a massacre followed. Based on a later Ottoman census, we know Nicosia had a population of roughly 1,200 people in 1572, meaning that following the siege, nearly 20,000 people were killed and or taken as slaves. Upon hearing this, a multinational Christian fleet of some 200 vessels that had left Crete for Cyprus turned back, believing the island was already lost. The fortress of Kyrenia up north then surrendered without any resistance, and by September 15th, Ottoman forces were sighted outside the last Venetian stronghold, Famagusta. And it was here the Ottomans would face a major setback in their conquest of Cyprus. The war had been going very badly for Venice, which by one account had lost some 56,000 people by this point, when including civilian losses. Still, the civil governor of Cyprus, Marco Antonio Bragadin, with a force of about 8,500 men, would not surrender Famagusta. Having arrived on the island back in 1569, Bragadin had personally overseen an overhauling of the port city's fortifications, including construction of the now famous Marcantonio Bastion. Possibly based off similar fortifications in Florence, the arrowhead-shaped bastion pointed inland, allowing Famagusta's defenders to command a large field of fire away from the city walls. And, if necessary, they could also fire along the line of the walls themselves, meaning the defenders could quickly and easily reorient their field of fire from one point to another as the battle unfolded. Where possible, the bastion had been built atop bedrock to prevent tunneling by enemy sappers, and it had been fitted with chimneys to ventilate smoke alongside storerooms for gunpowder barrels and cannonballs. An 80-foot wide moat had also recently been dug, and the city's harbor featured a strong chain that could be raised to prevent enemy ships from entering. Still, Bragadin likely knew he was facing near impossible odds. The Ottomans had now encircled the city and had begun building trenchworks and emplacements for their cannons, while some 150 ships enforced a naval blockade. What's more, perhaps wanting to show the fate that awaited the city's Venetian defenders, Mustafa had sent the severed head of Nicosia's viceroy to Bragadin, who, undaunted, prepared for the enemy assault. Despite overwhelming numbers, the main Ottoman assault on Famagusta was delayed until spring, at which point 80 additional ships had arrived from Constantinople, with reinforcements and more cannons. The Ottoman force, according to some accounts, now swelled to some 200,000 men. This number has been disputed, however, even more conservative estimates put the number of forces under Mustafa's command at around 100,000 to 120,000. Yet, they could still not dislodge the Venetians. A couple months into the siege, Mustafa realized the city's defenses were too strong, rendering bombardment ineffective. And so, instead, he ordered his men to dig a tunnel and pack it with explosives. His men did exactly as they were asked, and on June 20th, a tremendous explosion ripped through a section of Famagusta's outer wall. Seizing the opportunity, the Ottomans charged, only to be driven back after some 5 hours of bloody close-quarters combat. Again, Mustafa ordered his men to dig, this time having several tunnels detonated at once on June 29th. However, this too failed to bring the siege to an end. Mustafa, for his part, did try persuading Bragadin to surrender, but word had gotten through that a holy league of some 200 galleys, 100 other vessels, and 50,000 men was being organized by Pope Pius V. Repeated assaults did eventually give the Ottomans access to Famagusta's landward gate, however, which they set on fire, causing extensive damage. The blaze apparently burned with such intensity that iron melted, forcing the defenders back into the city. Things were not much better within Famagusta itself, with thousands having already died from starvation. As noted by Angelo Calepio, a Catholic friar in Famagusta during the siege, the position of the city was desperate. Within the walls, everything was lacking except hope. The wine was exhausted. Neither fresh nor salted meat nor cheese could be obtained, except at extravagant prices. The horses, asses, and cats were consumed. There was nothing to eat but bread and beans, nothing to drink but vinegar and water, and this too soon failed. The following day, the Ottomans attacked in force, and while successful in holding their position, the Venetians lost hundreds. This was followed by another attack the next day, which saw fierce hand-to-hand combat. More than 900 Venetian soldiers were killed and another 400 wounded. Having exhausted the city's provisions and with no ammunition nor sign of relief from Venice, Bragadin at long last requested terms for surrender. In exchange, the Ottomans agreed that all those who wished could exit the city and be guaranteed safe passage to Crete, thus bringing the 11-month siege of Famagusta to a close. In all, the Venetians, who numbered just a few hundred now, had lost about 8,000 men. This, however, does not account for civilian deaths, which likely were much higher. The Ottomans, in contrast, lost 52,000 men in taking the city, according to Venetian sources. Even if these numbers are inflated, more conservative estimates have put Ottoman losses around 20,000 men, an enormous loss for what otherwise was a relatively straightforward campaign. And this may in part explain what happened next. For you see, while meeting Bragadin, Mustafa began acting erratically and accused the Venetians of killing Ottoman prisoners and hiding munitions. Bragadin, it seems, responded in kind, accusing the Ottoman commander of making up an excuse to not honor the terms of surrender. Suddenly, Mustafa pulled a knife and cut off Bragadin's ears and nose. This was followed by a wanton massacre of all Christians still in the city. Bragadin, having now been imprisoned for 2 weeks, his wounds festering open sores, was then dragged around the city walls with a sack of earth and stone tied to his back. Next, he was tied to a chair and hoisted atop the mast of an Ottoman vessel, where he was left for several hours, possibly even days. Finally, he was taken to Famagusta's main square, stripped naked and tied to a column. There, he was flayed alive. His body was then dismembered and distributed among Ottoman soldiers as a war trophy of sorts. However, Mustafa was not done just yet. Bragadin's flayed skin was then sewn back together and stuffed with straw. This human scarecrow was then outfitted in Bragadin's military regalia and placed atop an ox that was to wander the streets of Famagusta. The skin was later sent over to Constantinople, where a Venetian seaman managed to steal it from the Ottoman arsenal in 1580. He thereafter brought Bragadin's remains to Venice, where they were later interred with full honors, in the Basilica dei Santi Giovanni e Paolo. Despite his brutal death in the Ottoman conquest of Cyprus, Bragadin and the 8,500 defenders at Famagusta managed something many thought impossible, holding their position against overwhelming odds for an incredible 11 months. This in turn bought precious time for the nascent Holy League, which dealt the Ottomans a decisive defeat at the Battle of Lepanto in October 1571. More than just a military victory, this was a moral one. It chipped away at the myth of Ottoman invincibility and gave hope to Christian Europe. Also, just look at the number of slaves freed. That's crazy. As a reminder, if you enjoy content like this, be sure to go ahead and hit the like button. I also highly recommend subscribing and hitting the bell icon as well, so as to be notified when new videos are released.